Relevant U.S. intelligence agencies had no comment on this dispute with Mr. Trump or its implications. Elaine, U.S. investigators are trying to verify what, if any, aspects of the conduct related to Mr. Trump can be verified.
Well, Major, Mr. Trump did acknowledge Russia was probably responsible for the DNC hack, but came short of condemning Russia and Vladimir Putin. Is that enough, you think, to silence his critics?
Well, it certainly will not satisfy or silence the critics among the Democratic Party or Democratic partisans. And it may continue to raise questions among some Republicans about whether or not President-elect Trump and future President Trump is taking the issue of cyber security and cyber hacking seriously enough. But for this transition team, this entire issue they see as one designed by partisans to undermine the legitimacy of the Trump election, and they believe it's wise for Mr. Trump to only acknowledge that Russia was involved and go no farther than that. And Elaine, it's worth pointing out, that was a very grudging acknowledgement by the president-elect. He has for a very long time, almost the entire course of this transition, tried to either deny it or keep it at arm's length or try to ignore that it was a relevant question. He's now acknowledged it's a relevant question. Russia was probably responsible for it, but he doesn't condemn it, and he gives no insight whatsoever into what he intends to do about it. He did make reference to a request he's going to put forward to his relevant cybersecurity advisors to come with a report in 90 days about how to dramatically increase U.S. cyber defenses throughout the federal government. But that's all he said on that particular topic.
Well, Major, as you know, Mr. Trump once again slammed the intelligence agencies, this time accusing them of leaking unverified information about him to the press. He said on Twitter the agencies were delivering one last shot and then compared it to Nazi Germany. We heard some of it in your piece. What did you make of Mr. Trump's response?
Well, this is an interesting issue because there's no evidence, Elaine, that U.S. intelligence leaked this information. It had been circulating among some reporters and some news organizations for some period of time. Arizona Republican Senator John McCain acknowledged today that he received it, looked at it, handed it off to the FBI, thought it was at least worthy of some further scrutiny. So this had been circulating for some period of time, even before the election. So the idea that this was leaked by U.S. intelligence agencies doesn't really have foundation. It is a grievance without real underlying facts behind it. Now, it's also clear from what Mr. Trump was implying today that he was angered that this 35 pages of raw, unverified intelligence was condensed into 2 pages and attached to the report on Russian hacking. The suggestion very strongly from him today was that should never have been there. It should never have been in a position to be brought to my attention in any way, shape, or form. And the leaking that it was brought to my attention disturbs him as well.
Well, Mr. Trump said that he would ask his newly named intelligence officials to submit a report about hacking. Do we know anything more about that?
No, there's a 90-day timeline, which is not a long time. This is not a new issue for those in the cybersecurity community in the United States. And it has been acknowledged, routinely acknowledged by the Obama administration, that cyber defenses are grossly inadequate. There was the well-documented hack, probably by Chinese hackers under the Office of Personnel Management, some 22 million records, tax, personnel, and otherwise, intruded upon by Chinese hackers in all probability. That was the most conspicuous example of very insufficient cyber defenses at the federal government level. This is not a new issue, but Mr. Trump is trying to give it heightened relevance and focus on those kinds of activities and not so much on what happened in the election and what its implications are or are not for his relationship to the U.S. intelligence community or his election itself.
On another topic, Major, you asked the president-elect about his plans for nominating a Supreme Court justice. What did we learn here about the timeline?
Mr. Trump said for the very first time, this was real news, that he will nominate a justice to fill the seat made vacant by the death of Associate Justice Antonin Scalia within 2 weeks of his inauguration. What that means is Mr. Trump expects his Attorney General designee, Jeff Sessions, to be confirmed by the Senate by then, be in place, and the transition team has made it very clear to me, and Mr. Trump verified it today in public, that once the Attorney General is in position and there's a conversation with Mr. Trump, the White House counsel and other relevant advisors, that Supreme Court nominee will be presented to the country and the United States Senate. So we now know he's conducting interviews, he's getting close, and 2 weeks after inauguration, he intends to introduce the nominee to the country.
And Major, you also asked Mr. Trump about keeping one of his biggest campaign pledges, building the wall on the border with Mexico. Does he still plan on having Mexico pay for it?
He still is planning on having Mexico pay for it. That's the plan, that's the aspiration. And when I said to him, it's now clear that U.S. taxpayers are going to pay for it first, he said, no, you're misreporting it. Then he essentially verified everything that has been discussed on Capitol Hill, which is through the appropriations process, Congress is going to work rapidly to devote the funds to building a wall. That's what President-elect Trump called it. The architectural designs in some areas refer to it much more as a reinforced, very difficult to cross fence, but whatever the terminology, Mr. Trump acknowledged it will be taxpayers who will be footing that bill on the front end, and that it is his aspiration, he said, within a year or a year and a half, to have Mexico, by some means, completely undisclosed and non-specified, pay for that initial taxpayer investment that comes from the United States taxpayers. So, the wall will be built right away, he says, or at least construction will begin on it right away, funded by U.S. taxpayers, and his very strong hope and his commitment again in public was to make sure that by one way or another, Mexico is the ultimate financier of that wall.
Finally, Major, Mr. Trump clarified that he wants Congress to not just repeal but also simultaneously replace the Affordable Care Act. Do you expect GOP leaders to fall in line and back this new approach to replace Obamacare so quickly?
Fall in line in concept, very difficult to fall in line in legislative calendar action. The House of Representatives can probably move at a pace relatively close to the very accelerated pace that President-elect Trump outlined today. The United States Senate has procedures by which it can avoid a filibuster, which could kill it entirely, but still it has to go through a process that will take some time. February, March is the schedule I've heard most commonly referred to on Capitol Hill for achieving the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and now Mr. Trump has made it very clear he wants a replacement mechanism drafted, put in place, voted on, and brought to his desk. That second part of the equation, Elaine, very difficult because there is no freestanding, reviewable legislation to replace the Affordable Care Act. Nothing that's been scored by the Congressional Budget Office or been reviewed by all the various stakeholders. And in privatized health insurance in America, there are a lot of stakeholders, not just doctors and hospitals and insurance companies, the drug manufacturers, a great number of stakeholders, all of whom are very interested in what may end up replacing the Affordable Care Act. That legislative work, that political work, that salesmanship work has not even begun. So meeting this timeline will be exceedingly difficult. And I assume Republicans in Congress will give as much rhetorical support to moving as rapidly as they can, but they will also have to have some painstaking and possibly some very candid and unhappy conversations with the president-elect, soon-to-be president, about just how practical his accelerated timeline is.
Complicated issue, to say the least. Major Garrett, thank you so much.
Sure.